live button, click. And we're live. It is Tuesday, June 8th, 2021, 5:17 p.m., which is a time in the history, the 438 episode history of In Lieu of Fun we have never started at before. And the fact that we are 2 minutes late is my fault. The fact that we are deferred by 15 minutes is out of respect for our guest who had a book talk.
It's time zones.
It's the fault of time zones, yeah. If we had universal time, this would not have happened.
Correct.
And I want to monologue today about nothing in particular, because I have nothing particular on my mind. I've been dealing with administrivia on Lawfare all day, and so I have nothing particular to say. Kate's got a sunburn, and Jonathan's got a new book out. So,
wait, I have to see. I think I have a copy of it. I want to go see if so I can hold
do
it
have
up.
a copy of it. We are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to talk about the Constitution of Knowledge. And so, Jonathan, while Kate is getting a copy of your book, I just want to start with the question, what is the Constitution of Knowledge, and why does knowledge need a constitution?
Well, first, I'd like to thank you guys because this is the first book in history that was workshopped live on In Lieu of Fun.
So far, the only book in history.
The first and so far only. Surely not the last. So
I loved that. That was fun.
So the Constitution of Knowledge is the institutions and rules, call them norms if you prefer, that keep a society, any society, large or small, moored to reality and able to settle disagreements about truth, about, facts, what's true and what's false. And every society has some kind of epistemic regime, whether it's a small tribe that uses an oracle to decide, whether it's going to rain tomorrow or not, or a gigantic totalitarian state that relies on Joseph Stalin, or a religious hierarchy like the Catholic Church, or something very different, the United States and the reality-based community globally, which relies on the Constitution of Knowledge, which is very different from all of the above.
One of the things that I'd love for you to explain is what work you think the word constitution does here.
Thank you. So we have this notion, if you ask people, where does knowledge come from in a free society, they'll say the marketplace of ideas. And I love that metaphor, don't get me wrong. It's now 102 years old. Thank you, Oliver Wendell Holmes, who initially thought of it.
I'm writing a paper about it right now.
You are?
It's bad. Yeah, it's bad. Anyways, keep going.
The metaphor or Oliver Wendell Holmes?
The metaphor, not that guy. Sorry.
Okay. I might be about to anticipate you. So I actually like that metaphor, but it is woefully incomplete, and it turns out to be misleading because it leads to this notion that, by the way, social media platforms went in for, that all you need is just a big open space and lots of talk, and knowledge will surface because the better ideas will prevail. And any undergraduate, when you tell this to, will say, well, how do we know that the better ideas prevail? Because in the commercial market, a lot of terrible products prevail. And that turns out to be a profound, deep question that John Stuart Mill does not answer. He kind of gives you this black box. Conversation happens, good ideas emerges. This book is about what's inside that black box, and it turns out the person you need to tell you what's in it is not an epistemologist, it's James Madison. And that the same ideas that make the US Constitution function are also at work in the epistemic Constitution. They're very similar. It's not just like an analogy, it's not a metaphor. And it's stuff like you pit faction against faction and bias against bias. That's how you get knowledge. Checks and balances. No one institution or person can make law or can make knowledge. Very decentralized. Decision making is spread out very broadly, so no one faction can dominate. That's how science works. That's how politics works. Open-ended rules. In politics, government will keep changing. No one's entitled to rule forever. Science, journalism, all the reality-based fields. We have knowledge and it accumulates and it's good knowledge, but it's always subject to change and refinement. They both are systems that organize cooperation on a massive scale, and they use impersonal rules. Anybody can vote with the same result. Anybody should be able to make an empirical contribution with the same result. It shouldn't matter who you are. And then there's the biggest and the last, and the one my book really tries to develop in detail, and that's they both rely on tons of institutions and norms. Ben wrote a book about this on the political side. The US Constitution is not just words on paper that outline a few specific things. It's mostly under the surface institutions and norms like rotation in office, and like judicial review, which the Supreme Court invented, and like political parties, which Madison never envisioned. Well, the same is true in knowledge. It's tons of institutions. It's not just this unstructured conversation. It's very structured. If you want to get published in a law review with an important idea, you're going to have to submit it. It will go out for peer review. There will be guidelines. You cannot begin it with a phrase like, "Ben, you ignorant slut." That's a Saturday Night Live joke for those of you who are shocked.
My line.
No, that's Kate's line.
That's what I called that. Oh, remember?
It's got
sorry,
all this
that
structure.
episode was funny.
It's
We
got
did that
all
for
this,
Pugilism Week.
So sorry for the long answer, but it's got all of this structure. And the reason for the constitution of knowledge concept is to surface that structure and say, guys, the marketplace of ideas isn't enough. You have to do all this other stuff and get it right. And by the way, Donald Trump and his troll army and the cancelers and the conspiracy theorists and the anti-vaxxers and all of those other people, the Russians, they are doing specific things in very sophisticated ways to undermine those particular norms and institutions. That's what's going on inside the black box right now.
Can I follow up, Ben, or do you have a question?
No, go ahead.
So, okay. So
I'm going to pour some whiskey.
Do it. Ooh. Oh, that looks good.
What's the
Who
picture?
Who is that?
The picture is a picture of the father of the distiller.
Oh.
Who,
Was a professor?
Was a professor.
I'm
Or
going to make
maybe
my own whiskey and put my face on it, and then people are going to be like, who's that lady on a bottle called the professor? And I'll be like,
I thought maybe.
No, the distiller is not a professor. The distiller is the son of a professor.
I know.
And
That.
he made a bottle of whiskey. He's a high school classmate of Tamara Witness's, and he started a distillery and made a special bottle in honor of his father.
I thought maybe it was a Gilligan's Island whiskey.
Nope. It's quite good, actually.
So, okay, I'm with you, except here is my yaha, which is, okay, so we have this Madisonian, which I'm like I love that part of Madison, this Madisonian idea of kind of the institutions and the elitism that takes over and like
Professionalism, please.
Professionalism. Right, and you mentioned peer review. Let's mention, I don't know, the Senate. Let's mention courts. Let's like all of these kind of the press, gatekeepers, right? But and here's where the realist, well, I would usually say legal realist when I talk about this in legal context, but the realist in me comes through, which is that these are not the idea that these are true crucibles in which knowledge and that knowledge is formed from like crystalline kind of perfectly like, you know, presented like objective information is a lie. That like peer review, people see cites to their friends' papers or their papers and it changes how they review the paper, or that like that they're, you know, and there are some ideas that are really great and there's some ideas that are really bad, but a lot of stuff in the middle. And then it ends up being a lot of politics and a lot of who knows who and a lot of what's familiar to you and a lot of cronyism, like on purpose or like kind of accidentally. And so what is like, how do you kind of confront that idea of like basically that there are all of these institutions that create knowledge, but they themselves are often imperfect?
Well, that's the whole reason we have the system, right? So the core problem here is that human beings are not wired to find abstract truth. We're pretty good about, is that sound in the bushes a tiger or the wind? Or where is the next tribe camped? We're really no good at all about who should we worship? Where does the rain come from? And we have lots of biases that are cognitive and very deep, and they often compound each other. And then we have another bias, which is to believe what our friends believe and trust them. So we quickly go down rabbit holes and echo chambers, and whole societies lose contact with reality and then collapse into sects and then collapse into war. And that's 200,000 years of human history. And that's how it works without something like what we got. So these exact flaws and all the messiness of human cognition and interreaction are why we need these institutions which provide various forms of discipline. And yeah, we can all come up with tons and tons and tons of examples of peer review that wasn't great, or mistakes made by journalists, like, the big Wuhan virus postmortem that's going on right now. But here's the thing about this system. It's not that it doesn't make mistakes, it's that it finds and corrects its mistakes. It makes mistakes very, very quickly, orders of magnitude more quickly than any other system, and then corrects them very quickly. And it doesn't immediately work in every case. But so you use this term gatekeepers, and I don't like that term because it imagines...
I don't either, but I don't know what I was to say.
It imagines a binary process where someone says yes or no, good idea, bad idea, you advance, you don't advance. Think instead of a network with many, many professional nodes. Like, think of all the law reviews you could apply to, all the other magazines you could apply to. There are many, many ways through this network, but each one of those nodes is evaluating your article or your idea, and think of it as giving it a rating, filtering system. And if it looks like a good idea or article, if it seems to hold up, they will pass it on to other nodes or check with other nodes, and it will continue through the network. If it's not so good, they might give it a 20% rating, right? That's not a 0. It doesn't stop you. There are plenty of other nodes. But at that rating, your idea will actually fairly quickly die out on the network. So there are lots of ways through it, but the aggregate result of this is a filtering and pumping system. When I do my slideshow on this, I show pictures of filtering and pumping networks that have multiple nodes and multiple way through. And that's the magic. It's all of those nodes, and it's the multiplicity of them, and the fact that they're following a general set of principles and rules.
All right. I want to ask, how novel is this system, and how endemic is it organic to liberalism? So I think it's fair to...
That is a really good question.
That all knowledge eventually comes through the interaction of something like the system that you're describing. That is, other than what you can see and feel and smell and taste yourself, like this apple tastes good, this one will kill you, this one I picked from the tree of knowledge. First of all, has any society ever gained serious knowledge through means other than this? And has this developed simply because, as a system, it is benefiting from the marketplace of marketplaces of gatekeepers? Like, it's actually prevailing for the same reason that it works.
So my claim in the book and in the predecessor volume, the best book I ever wrote, which will outlive me by 1,000 years, which is called Kindly Inquisitors, New Attacks on Free Thought. It's really not a free speech book, it's about science. So it argues that there are three kinds of liberal systems that we rely on. One is global economy, the other is democracy, and the third and the greatest of them all is liberal science, by which I mean all of this stuff. It's not just science, but it's also history and government and law and journalism and all this reality-based stuff. And they're all liberal because I argue that only liberal systems, even in principle, can do the kind of hugely scaled social organization between strangers that is necessary in order to develop all this knowledge or run an economy. There's just simply no other kind of network that can handle the scale and the information. So yeah, I think it has to be liberal. You certainly can have knowledge develop in illiberal societies, but of course, a lot of the time you'll get wrong answers and they'll hang around for much too long. And it tends to develop very, very, very slowly because usually people who have wrong answers in illiberal societies are punished with ostracism or jail or even death, and that inhibits making hypotheses and checking them. It inhibits the formation of knowledge, and that's why I think is literally the case. I couldn't prove this, but I think it is literally the case that on any given day, the modern reality-based community adds more to the sum total of human knowledge than the entire first 200,000 years of human history, until roughly the time of Isaac Newton. And yeah, I think only a liberal system can do that.
I agree with that very strongly. I think that's right.
So I want to ask, given that you wrote this in Kindly Inquisitors 30 years ago now, why'd you write it again?
Because I missed all the stuff inside the black box.
All right, so walk us through what you did in Kindly Inquisitors and then what was left undone that you did here.
So Kindly Inquisitors is based on the model of John Stuart Mill, and especially Karl Popper, and especially Charles Sanders Peirce. And, well, the first two, we'll set aside Peirce, but the first two are really kind of thinking about what do individuals need to do? What's kind of the attitudes and the practices that individuals should follow in order to make knowledge? And, you know, you'd like Popper says, you put your ideas out for criticism and they go into this big public space and they're criticized, and on any given day, the surviving ideas are knowledge. And that's all absolutely true. That's a brilliant insight and an important insight. You know, it's falsification and all that. So Kindly Inquisitors endorses that viewpoint and further refines it by making the incredibly audacious move, I can't believe I got away with this, of saying you can basically boil down all of science to two principles: no final say and no personal authority, and any system that uses those two rules will wind up looking like science or like law or fact-based journalism, because it'll have an ongoing process where everything is questionable, but and everything needs to be tested, but whatever you do to test it needs to be something anyone else could do. That's why only liberalism can organize this big system, because I can't say, well, because I'm a white homosexual Jewish atheist, I have the unique authority over knowledge, and I don't have to talk to anyone else or prove anything to anyone else. You can't do that. So that's Kindly Inquisitors. So then along comes the current period, and we begin to see some really crazy stuff start to happen around 2014, 2013, 2014. We see the beginning of internet dogpiles canceling, people getting fired, random campaigns bursting out of nowhere. We begin to see Russians, we don't know it at the time, but they're starting to hack the system. They're doing stuff like, you know, the famous Jade Helm campaign. You know about this one, guys, probably, right? You know, a bunch of people online get convinced that this military exercise, routine training exercise, it's in its 14th year in the American Southwest, is actually an Obama plot to seize control of the government, take everyone's guns. This goes viral.
Which
everyone
was,
goes,
by the way. That's
oh,
why
quiet.
Nobody has any more guns in the United States, and yeah, Jade Helm worked. They don't even know it.
So it turned out, we didn't know this at the time, but Jade Helm and a lot of other stuff was emanating from the Internet Research Agency in Russia, and they were testing our networks to see what they could do in 2016. And then you get the biggest change of all, massive, massive, epical change, which is the emergence on the American scene of a Russian-style disinformation genius in the person of Donald Trump, who unleashes Russian-style disinformation tactics on American politics in a way we've never seen before, and with devastating effectiveness, because we have no immunity to these tactics in America. And I'm sitting here going, well, okay, it's all very nice to have these two rules and lots of people following them, but what the F? Sorry, I don't like the F word. What the F? You know, what's something is breaking down. And that's when I think, okay, the next stage of the project, we got to look under the hood. We got to look inside the system of who are the institutions. Let's name them. What are the practices? What are they doing? What are these rules? How are they organized? And what are their vulnerabilities? How are these outside forces, trolls and cancelers and Trump and conspiracy theorists and anti-vaxxers and all the rest? How are they actually getting into these networks and disrupting them? And so that's what this book does. And it gives you the theory of that. And it does something totally unprecedented, which is say cancelers on the left and Trump on the right are very different, but they're both basically engaged in epistemic warfare. That's what's going on here.
All right, so break that down and first of all, explain to us the theory of how these networks, influence networks, are working, and how the epistemic warfare against the Constitution of Truth works, and then justify your outrageous statement of moral equivalence between Donald Trump and the cancelers of the left.
No moral equivalence. Absolutely not. I think Trump and his networks are the bigger threat by far right now. I wouldn't have said that before Stop the Steal. I would have said they're about even. But since Stop the Steal, I'm horrified by the effectiveness of what they're doing and the reach of what they're doing. So no quantitative equivalence, no moral equivalence. The equivalence I'm making is a tactical equivalence. Mm-hmm. It's like two very different armies, different size, different goals, but they've adopted similar weaponry. So that's what I'm saying. So let's talk for a minute. Here I'm getting in Kate's ground, so I'll have to try to be careful here and rigorous. Let's talk about epistemic warfare, what's more commonly called information warfare, which I define as the organization and manipulation of a social or media environment for political advantage, and specifically to divide, dominate, disorient, or demoralize, I should say, a target population. Demoralizing is demobilizing, because then people feel that there's nothing they can do, they're weak, they're helpless, there's no point resisting. So those are the conditions that these people are out to create. Vladimir Putin wants to divide America because he knows that'll weaken it. Cancelers want to demoralize academics by making them feel like if you say that, terrible things could happen to you, so don't even bother. You can't change it. We're in control. Trolls want to disorient. They put out massive amounts of misinformation and disinformation. Trump does that. He's used what's disinformation experts call the fire hose of falsehood tactic, which was really developed and refined by Russians, which is you just put out so much garbage that you flood the pumping and filtering network. You can't possibly keep up with all the masses of bizarre and contradictory falsehood and sometimes half-truth, and you just swamp the system. People just become confused and don't trust anyone. These are the kinds of tactics we're talking about. They hack particular aspects of our brain. For example, trolling. This is not just about lulz. We are wired when we see someone who's a friend or a member of our community, or when a core principle of ours is challenged and insulted, we want to rush to the defense of our core principles and our community. That's a very, very strong human urge. Well, that means you can get a lot of attention on undisciplined networks like social media by trolling people, by insulting everyone all the time. And who's the all-time master of this? Donald Trump, who's well aware of what he's doing. We have recorded instances where he's not doing well in the news cycle, so he unleashes a Twitter attack on someone, and he says to his aides, well, that'll keep him the rest of the day. That'll divert the news cycle, and it does. You weaponize limitations of cognitive bandwidth by using the fire hose of falsehood. People just can't pay attention to all that much, so they just become confused at some point, especially if media tries to keep up with it all, which is supposed to be our job.
I stopped
right?
watching the news.
Yeah. And so all of these things, these tactics, conspiracy bootstrapping, that's another big one. Trump is brilliant at this one. This is where you seed a conspiracy theory, where you pick up an existing one, you amplify it through many networks, and then you say, once it gets more traction, you say, well, a lot of people are saying this, so it should be investigated. And then you say there's a cover-up because it either hasn't been investigated, or it has been, but the investigation came out the wrong way. And then you do this again and again and again. Like, you say a former member of Congress committed murder, right? These tactics hijack our attention. They hijack our brain. What the reality-based community is really doing is parceling out attention. It's saying, pay attention to this idea and not that idea because it's a better idea. That becomes dysfunctional. So these are really powerful tactics, and there are more of them, but those are some of the main ones.
So let me just kind of restate it slightly and see if you agree with it. So I think that and I know that there were things that I disagreed with, and I still don't quite. I think that the social media part of this, remember when you were well, just a second ago, that you were talking about kindly inquisitors, and then you revisited it because you kind of see that you're like seeing inside the black box. But I think that there's another black box inside the black box. That's going to be revealed around the social media aspect of this. And I think that some of the things that you're claiming are good guesses, but guesses about like kind of what the situation is going to be. And let me give you an example. So one of the things that we've seen in the last couple of months of Trump being taken down, and generally, I'm going to try to, maybe someone in the chat can find it for me or something. There was a great I think it was a New York Times article that showed that most misinformation and most disinformation around like COVID, or just maybe disinformation about the election in general, came from like 7 people. Right? And so this is a very classic idea actually in the internet. It is not, it is analogous, but it is not completely the same as the let's say 30 Macedonian kids like putting out false propaganda and it having a huge effect. Because that is like an intentionality, and they're manipulating systems. The other part is like a manipulation of systems, but it's also it's one that people actively engage in and know that this person might be putting false information into the ecosphere, and they like engage with it anyways as like a choice. Does that make sense? Am I kind of, so like you follow Donald Trump and you know that everything that Donald Trump, like, that he is a political figure and that he is espousing like opinion, whether you believe what he's going to say is fact or not. You might agree with 50% of it versus like 50 of it you just agree with and you don't believe. I think that this is going to get more nuanced and more complicated as we go forward, rather than the other way around. And I also think that platforms, and we've seen this already, I think that platforms are going to start running away from a lot of the tried and true classical legal mechanisms that we have come across to deal with things like freedom of expression and harmful speech. And I think they're going to go the other way. I think they're going to start getting rid of ideas. Like, and we're just seeing this with the oversight board this week, like getting rid of public figures, getting rid of the idea of newsworthiness, because they were never great definitions, just like Holmes' marketplace of ideas was never really an answer in and of itself for anything. It was just kind of like a holding pattern. What do you think about kind of that kind of movement away from government's conceptions of some of these rights into kind of the platforms deciding them on their own?
I think it's inevitable. I adore Nadine Strawson. We agree on almost everything, but she kind of takes a civil libertarian view of Facebook, that it should basically adopt First Amendment rules. And I don't think that's practical or wise. It's always been curated. It's always had algorithms. They all do, right? They've always had under the hood. They've had systems that try to do in various ways, but much more poorly, what the reality-based community is, which is passing stuff up through the network depending on some measure of value. It turns out to be commercial value, not epistemic value, which is too damn bad. So it's inevitable that they'll move in that direction. I'd be curious if you agree with this statement, because you know more about it than I do. I think some of the change that will happen will involve policy changes, like deciding whether to take Trump on or off, or to amplify or disamplify. But I think the bigger changes, ultimately, the more important and productive changes, will be at the level of product design and not policy design. This is hard to do, but these networks were designed basically as advertising vehicles to capture eyeballs, regardless of the value of the information conveyed. And they're going to have to, and I think already are starting to weave in some changes to behavior that are incentivized, and algorithmic decisions that will help make smarter decisions about what gets passed through the system. I noticed, Twitter, now if I tweet out a link without ostensibly reading it, right there on Twitter.
That's been happening for like the last 4 months. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a small thing, but there's tons of stuff like that going on behind the scenes, and there's going to be more to come.
Well, you'd be interested to know maybe, I think that no, I do agree with some of what you're saying, except that I think that people very vastly I think people over-rotate on the eyeballs and the ad systems and how it impacts the day-to-day content moderation decisions. I don't think it does at all. No one content moderation decision makes a huge difference in how many people are logging onto Facebook and doing their thing. Mostly those are operations kinds of decisions by people that are on a team. As for AI doing a better job than humans, I mean, I think we're just so far from that. And I think that there's a little bit of a false hope there. And I actually think that AI might have really dystopic kind of future for censorship, in which everything is there's a lot of preemptive censorship of speech because it it hits some type of flag, and the flag isn't perfect, or the AI isn't perfect, and it takes stuff down, and there's no way to get it to explain to the AI or explain to the person or to anyone. There's no mechanism to have better review for that type of speech. But to your point generally about policy versus product, Facebook is rumored to be in a real moment of change right now, of basically completely gutting all of their their management structure and putting the policy under the head of product.
Wow,
so that,
really?
Yeah. So that that is, and I think that it is super interesting we can talk about it later, but it's I think that it's, to your point, I think that it is a very, I don't know, I think it's a very, well, also, I should say that policy has two different meanings at Facebook. One is the Joel Kaplan lobbyist, in Washington, dealing with the government's policy, and one is content moderation and speech policy. And the speech policy that we're talking about is rumored to be going possibly underneath product. And I think that that's a really interesting development. And I think it's kind of in line with a lot of what you write about, actually. So. Ben, you're muted.
Genevieve de la Fera, you get the first question.
Oh, I haven't met Genevieve, but she's famous.
Oh my gosh,
Hello.
Genevieve is amazing.
Genevieve and Alice are the two I want to meet, because I haven't encountered them yet.
You're going to meet Alice next. Here, I'll bring Alice
Alice
up
is wonderful,
so
that,
too. Alice is the only member... Alice is the only member of the Greek chorus whose name has become a verb. To Alice somebody is to bring them onto the screen and leave them there while other people are talking for a protracted period of time. So what's actually happening now is Alice is being Aliced while Genevieve, who was previously Aliced, asks her question.
Well, it's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So,
you're famous, you know.
Oh dear. But my question is, when we're seeking to engage with questions of disinformation, and we're trying to engage with them with reason, does our own conception and veneration of America as a pluralistic society act as both a sword and a shield? And how do we better advocate for rational pluralism?
Let me think about the constituent pieces about this. So, first of all, as a species, we cannot be rational without pluralism. There are better and worse habits of mind, and I'm all for getting the math right as individuals, but where rationality really comes from is from the network that we described of people checking each other, because we are never, in fact, smart people are even better than others at fooling themselves and fooling others. So rationality and viewpoint pluralism go hand in hand, and that's why I call knowledge Madisonian epistemology. Because like Madison's notion that the way you reconcile democracy with factions is you need to, as he said, extend the sphere. You need to make it big. You need to have lots of different voices in there. So go together at that very fundamental way. In the individual way, there's a whole lot in the book about, there are things we can do as individuals to try to restrain our own worst behavior. Now, most of what restrains our terrible behavior in debates, arguments, interactions with others, are a lot of social incentives and structures that, tell us I'm not going to get anywhere if I start my academic article with "ban you ignorant slut." That's heavily that's heavily disincentivized. Otherwise, people would do it, and what we see incentives to do it. So I guess I'm saying, yeah, individual rationality is important, and I'm thrilled that Steve Pinker has an important new book coming out about rationality in September. But what we really need to be looking at is what Kate was just talking about, which is these social systems and how they work to incentivize better and worse conduct in the epistemic sphere, in the sphere of knowledge and debate.
I just want to say, wait, hold on.
Oh, sorry.
Alice is unalliced.
Alice
disappeared for a second.
We're going to bring her back.
Wait, I'm not calling out people. I was being nice. That's what you do when you're a friend to someone, is you tell them something, like they have something broccoli in their teeth before they go on.
And then you announce it on the show more broadly.
Well, it's like not embarrassing if she knows it and then goes to fix it. It's more embarrassing if she does the show for like 45 seconds and doesn't know about it, right? Like, I'm sorry.
Richard Wattenbarger, who does not have broccoli in his teeth. The floor is yours.
I feel like I've been Alice while waiting to
No,
be
it was
Alice,
too brief
but
a time. I don't think if it's, unless it's like a full 3 or 4 minutes,
embarrassing,
it cannot be called being Alice.
Okay.
It has to tempt people into doing embarrassing things because they forget they're on camera.
Yeah,
this is true. And it doesn't take much to tempt me to do that, I'm afraid. So it's great to see you on here. I always enjoy hearing you because you're so level-headed. I'm curious, what do you see as the role of trust in how Americans today approach the question of truth? For example, people believe they have good reasons to trust various media outfits, even if outside observers recognize that what the outfits are putting out there is usually demonstrably empirically false. And in other words, how much of what we face is a truth problem and how much is really a trust problem?
Well, there are two ways of stating the same problem, right? Most of what we think we know, we take on trust, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And then we decide who to trust. And one of the great achievements of Western civilization and liberalism is that we persuaded a lot of very tribal, parochial human beings to give enough trust to this huge impersonal network of strangers to make decisions about what's true and false, to actually use those concepts, that knowledge, as a basis for social decision making, right? We decide to trust the CBO and about the budget and NOAA about the weather. So yeah, trust is the name of the game. And another way to say what we've been saying is that these attackers are aimed at undermining that trust. And if Trump is about anything, of course it's doing that. That's why he said that the media are enemies of the people and fake news and lie all the time. It's why he falsified a weather report that had NOAA's institutional seal on it. It's why he says publicly, you can't trust what you're seeing in the media, you can only trust me. I mean, that's the name of the game here, right? And the next logical question is, okay, so in one sentence or less, how do we reestablish trust in the reality-based community? Well, that's a very hard question. It's much easier to demolish trust than to rebuild it. So we don't know quite the answer to that. Incidentally, we lost Richard, is that his name? But I want to know if he's the person who left the following comment and whether others agree with it. He said, I always listen to and read Jonathan because his reasoning is often appealing and his manner is low-key. I tend to think what I enjoy about him and his work are the same things that blunt his message.
Oh, really? I think you have a snappy message. I actually think you're very good at messaging. Really?
Am I too low-key and appealing?
What do you want me to tell you?
Such criticism, a little goes a long way.
I don't think that's a criticism. I don't know.
No,
That's
I'm joking.
I thought that's actually a really nice compliment in this day and age. Sorry.
Alice Lee, you have nothing in your teeth. You are
lovely human.
A good sport for taking Kate's abuse like that.
No,
And Jonathan Rauch wants to meet you. So,
Okay.
Alice.
You're a
no
legend.
longer driving around rural Nevada.
That's
You're a
true.
legend
That was
in the world
We
of
got
In Lieu
flat.
of
It
Fun.
Alice's legend.
How do you?
And you're concise.
Unlike me.
Let's see. Let's put that to the test. Okay. So, as someone who went to college and graduated in 2017, a relatively liberal college,
Can you tell us where?
Tufts, which my friends who went to, let's see, where was it? Oberlin were like, then.
I have
Like,
no idea
I
where
heard
you
Tufts
live in
is
Boston,
conservative.
but every time I look, I'm in your apartment. I feel like I'm visiting my friends in Somerville when I was like after college. Like, and I'm like,
Got it in
oh,
one.
I know. Like,
You recognize the bay window. Yeah.
I know.
Okay, so so I feel like the kind of college experience that I say the word railing, but I don't, it's dramatic, railing against, is sort of the one that I had, and I'm interested in why you think there isn't a college that's distinguishing itself by saying we believe in this liberal ideal of free speech, and we want, to challenge our students and stuff like that, because it seems like no one sets themselves up that way.
Some are. University of Chicago has the Chicago Principles, and I think that's up to 75 universities. Now, signing a statement is different from making it real, but it's a positive step. And I was very pleased when, the usual script, Alice. Some students or faculty complain that someone's point of view on social media or an article they've written makes them unsafe, and call for an investigation, and the university then puts that person through a grueling, terrifying investigation that lasts a number of months, in which there's no lawyer, there's no disclosure, there's no anything. And at the end of the day, maybe that person keeps their job, but never makes the mistake again of crossing the activist in the classroom who says, you need to investigate this professor. Well, that happened to someone who questioned, I think it was affirmative action or policing, something like that, a faculty member in an off-campus forum. And the investigation was demanded, and President Zimmer of Chicago, after a wait of just a couple of days, issued a very short, very clear statement that said, no crime, no wrongdoing is alleged here. There's nothing to investigate. We support free speech. Goodbye. So that needs to happen a lot more often. There are other universities that are good on this. Purdue, for example, is, it's like teaching First Amendment in its freshman module. And we've now seen the organization's the key word here, particularly on the canceling side. The name of the game is to isolate and intimidate your opponent by making them feel totally alone. Like, even if others agree with me, I don't know who they are. They won't come to my rescue. I'm helpless. That's demoralization. That's the end state that you want to achieve. You paralyze your ideological opponent. I heard this again and again from professors. There are lots of them quoted in the book. So courage is important, just pushing back. We've talked about that. But even more important is institutional and organizational backing. And we're starting to see lots of groups doing that. Academic Freedom Alliance, Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, Counterweight, which is a support group for employees who are facing this kind of pressure. Free Speech Union is starting in the United States, Princetonians for Free Speech. That's our friend Stuart Taylor's new group. The Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, Foundation for Individual Rights and Education has been around 22 years, but they're, I'm told, about to embark on a big new campaign. I think there's a counter mobilization that's already starting. And that's essential, because then there's support for people who stand up. They're not on their own anymore. They can get legal advice, they can get psychological counseling, they can get strategic advice, others will come to their aid, and counter pressure can be put on these institutions, not just, by the way, universities, but employers. They need to be pressured to adopt codes of conduct so that if an employee becomes controversial for First Amendment speech, they won't just fire them the next day.
Okay, so I have a question. I have a question about institutions and institutions' free speech rights or religiously protected rights. So what if you're a university and you're Catholic or evangelical and you have a certain type of mission that is in line with that, and it's not perfectly well defined. Is it counter to do academics that exist in a realm of thinking that they have a right to free speech? And I'm talking, so like I'm using that example because in that example, like maybe like being gay or being like talking about like gay marriage or talking about abortion rights or like whatever else would have some type of repercussion on kind of the on basically your academic freedom. And I'm very curious what you think in that kind of scenario. I feel like we're hearing,
that's an easy one. That's an easy one. First thing, broad point, it's important to distinguish free speech from academic freedom. They're related, but free speech is just, say what you think. Academic freedom is there are a bunch of rules and norms that we professors engage in, and others should not interfere with that. And those are different concepts because the second one implies signing up for some pretty severe disciplines, things that you have to do to earn your credentials to teach your class. And you convey those to your students by saying inside the classroom, there are going to be some rules. And they're not free speech rules. They're other rules. They're fair, but they're other rules. So it turns out that many sectarian colleges have been actually better than average at defending these rules, partly because they have values that are not as immediately swayed by their administrators and their very consumeristic students and parents. And others don't because, they're really about teaching religion. I'm, of course, totally fine with that, but that's easy. You just put on the first page of the catalog or the website, we are here to inculcate the values and ideas of Christianity, and that's why you're coming. But if they say we are here to train minds in critical thinking and to advance the path of knowledge, if they're billing themselves as a research university,
except if it comes to gays,
then they shouldn't be saying except if it comes to gays, right? Then they're betraying their promise to the reality-based community.
Mike Larkey, the floor is yours.
Hi, Mike. Is this your first time on?
Yeah, first time, long time.
Hi.
What's up, party people?
Welcome.
Nice to have you. Everyone's talking
nice to
about
be
Indian
here.
food in the chat, and I'm starving, and it's making me very hungry. Sorry.
Well,
Great.
to
Well, that's what
everybody
question's about.
to everyone talking about Indian food in the chat, if both Tom Nichols and Preet Bharara are multiple time appearers on this show, so if you guys invite them and they want to do the Indian Food Summit live on In Lieu of Fun, we will host it.
It's true. Anyways, Mike, sorry. Go ahead.
Sure. So I checked out the blurb for your book real quick before you came on, and you discuss sort of the epistemological crisis and cancel culture as both being part of this growing liberalism. But with cancel culture, you brought up sanctimony, which made me think how much of this is about a moral judgment of people accepting these alternate realities, or a moral judgment against people participating in cancel culture versus just the function of how people behave in our society. Does it matter? Is it that these are bad ways to be, or is it just that it's screwing up the system?
Yeah, I tend to focus more on the measures than the motives. I do not doubt the campus activists who are really determined to stamp out, for example, the idea that affirmative action doesn't work, who want to stigmatize that conversation and just basically, you can't say that around here without getting in trouble. I don't want to deny that they're well motivated, that they think they're pursuing the path of justice and that they're putting the sword to a terrible idea that should never be heard. But I don't really care about that because their behavior in that situation is inconsistent with having an environment in which students can learn and knowledge can develop. So I'm just going to say, I don't really care about your motivations. Don't do it. And same thing, by the way, on the disinformation side, Stop the Steal was those people at the Capitol weren't there saying, gee, I'm going to do a bunch of disinformation and propaganda and express something I don't believe. They really thought that the election was being stolen right there, 100 yards from where they were standing, and that this was the last day of democracy in the United States if they didn't get in there and fix it. So they were acting out of sincere patriotism, I think, most of them. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, Ben. Others might have a different interpretation, but the same rules apply. You still can't invade the Capitol.
Shailesh, the floor is yours.
Hello, third
Hey.
time on In Lieu of Fun, and finally my camera works.
Yeah, it's good to. actually
You're
see
not a
your-
black rectangle.
It's good to see your face as well as hear your voice.
So
You do look kind
I
of
had
like
pre-
a black rectangle, though.
I had a prepared
see a
joke for
resemblance.
that last time you called me a black rectangle. In reality, I'm more of a brown square.
You're not that, like, the lines aren't that sharp. I mean,
Yes.
I think, but you are in a remarkably windy place. It's really windy where you are. Where are you calling in from?
I'm at a stone's throw from Apple campus in Cupertine.
Uh-huh.
Cupertine now.
Yeah, and beautiful outside.
Cool.
Okay, so I would like us to explore how stand-up comedy about politics and society gets treated as if it's like serious and complete depiction of reality. And consider like George Carlin or Trump, and Trump is funny to his people. And their followers aren't just laughing along, they deeply believe in what they hear. And it's really annoying because well-researched opinion pieces written by people who know what they're talking about don't have anywhere near the impact of stand-up comedy. So I mean, that seems like a basic sort of problem in how we approach these topics.
I thought you were
So-
saying comedy, like the legal concept of comedy for like 10 seconds.
Nope.
And then I was like, what is going on? George Carlin had nothing to say about comedy. And then I was like, oh.
No, legal concept of if there's a legal concept of comedy, it's not in my vocabulary. I'm a computer science.
What do you think about stand-up comedy? Why are comedians so politically influential?
Are we talking about like Colbert and Seth Meyers and all those people?
Yeah, I think Shailesh's point is that
Well-
they have disproportionate influence because of the mode of engagement relative to people who know much more about the subject matters that they speak about.
Well, I don't know how you'd measure that. I'm sure they have influence. They don't have a fraction of the influence of Donald J. Trump, just to make something clear. And I don't think they have the same kind of influence that Tucker Carlson has, partly because they are comedians. One way they get influence, which I'm very impressed by, is that they do some outstanding reporting. You know, John Oliver, then The Daily Show. The Daily Show, you know, some of these programs have amazing research staffs and surface some really important ideas and explanations. And then they make it entertaining with comedy. But you can look at Seth Meyers, what does he call it? A sharper view, a closer view, whatever he calls it, that segment. And it's got jokes, but most of it's not jokey. So I think that's part of it. But, you know, comedy has always been very influential. Think about Mark Twain, you know, in some ways.
And Jonathan Swift.
And Jonathan Swift. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, this is one of the hardest points in all of content moderation on the internet generally, like, is that people have absolutely, like, people will think that they're joking or making a joke, and they will say something racist or marginally racist or like something that is like kind of like someone else takes huge offense to. And there is so much that we were joking about it being context dependent, that I knew that he meant comedy and not committee, but it's also context dependent. All of comedy is context dependent. You have to know the circumstances that are being slightly manipulated and be very familiar with the norms that are being slightly twisted or broken to get the joke, you know?
Zach Bliss.
One letter off was pretty good.
One letter, you know, What's
one letter, you know?
I don't know.
I never use my
you
middle
know?
letter, so that's basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Zach Bliss, your name always reminds me of Saved by the Bell.
Really?
The show. Yes.
I've never watched it, I'm going to be honest.
I figured you would look too young. But
The
anyways.
floor is
Thank you.
yours, and you get the last question today.
Excellent, thank you very much. So I have a question that I think appeals to a comment. Oh, hello. Hello, friend.
It's
That I think
Gurgi.
appeals.
It is Gurgi.
And at that note, my dog has wandered over as well. He's not coming with you, though. But
You know the rule. You have to show animals.
Please, puppy. Yeah. Oh.
Beautiful
Nice
dog.
dog. Beautiful dog.
Gorgeous.
He thinks he's a lot smaller than he is, but he still fits in the lap.
So if there were a dog raider as opposed to room raider on this show, you would win.
Wait,
Thank
you
you.
such a slander on Gurgi. No, everyone
Gurgi needs
wins
a
with
haircut,
dogs.
let's face it.
Everyone wins
see if
with
I can-
dogs, Jonathan.
Gurgi
Jesus.
has reached the age where he no longer cares much about Jonathan Rauch's opinion.
Oh.
Your question, sir.
All right. So I think my question appeals to your comment earlier where you said stuff like this stuff might come up more to design than policy changes. Like I think you made that comment earlier how like I'm blanking now that there's a dog on top of me. But how do we kind of, what things can we do to mitigate the kind of negative effects of like network effects on how truth spreads? And I'm thinking about cases where like people are being perfectly rational, everyone's doing the best they can, they're making like rational decisions, and yet we still fail to find the truth just because of how the network is structured. And like the typical example being the Zolman effect, for example. So I think this kind of appeals to like, how would we maybe improve the design of our truth-seeking institutions such that the network effects don't play? I mean, I'm not sure how much of a role we can say they do play for sure, but like
They play a big role.
Yeah.
They play a huge role, and one of the disadvantages of talking about this book is people want the three things that fix it, and it's not like that at all. This requires a multi-institutional, all of society response, and it's going to be everything. I mean, I could list 10 different buckets, everything from civics information and media literacy to platform redesign, and social and digital media, to civic organizations and counter mobilizations. And like, I'm a big fan of the Facebook Oversight Board because institutional guardrails are going to be part of this. That's how it's always worked in the past. So it's going to be a bunch of different things. And in terms of specifically, if you're asking about, so what do the digital media need to do? It's going to depend on each individual platform, right? And it's going to vary by each one, and it's going to be a lot of trial and error in a lot of different ways. And I don't think we know yet how that comes out. Maybe Kate can tell me. But that said, I think, again, Kate, tell me if this statement is true, that a lot of social media, and for that matter, digital media, which includes like Google, has realized that if they become an epistemic sewer,
Yes.
that's a bad business model.
Yes. No,
And
I'm writing
so-
this right now. So this is
And so, whereas as recently as probably 5 years ago, I would say very few of the smartest minds in the digital world were focused on the problem of being better epistemic citizens and creating products that have better rather than worse incentives. I would say now that there's probably many people in the realm of those companies and organizations that are focused on that. And Kate, would you agree with that?
Yeah. So this is why I disagree with the concept that like, oh, they just care about eyeballs and so they'll just let eyeballs in and they just want to drive ad revenue, because it's actually not about that. It's about their larger reputation as trustworthy places in various ways. And I think that concept is winning out. And I've been saying that for years, and like people thought I was being naive and stupid and like buying into like the companies for some reason, but it's not. It's very much that there's, I think you're exactly right. You put it really well, that there's just like, if you're a sewer, people are not happy with you, and it has a terrible reputational cost. And I think that
it's an
yeah.
unpleasant place to be. Yeah.
Yep.
So the point I made earlier, important clarification, it wasn't that all Facebook cares about is eyeballs right now. That's certainly not true. It's that the initial system design at the design level was optimized for attracting and marketing attention.
I don't think that's
That
right
was
either,
that
though.
was the infrastructure. No, that's not true.
No, I just think, honestly, Jonathan, it's like even less interesting than that. I think it was just a bunch of people making products and making like features and not caring like what the effects were going to be, and then just slapping ads on it. And then like as things like got better, like they would do more, but it was not like, I don't think it was about like the policy around the content moderation was not ever around.
Like the like button, the share button,
right? But those
the
are
algorithms,
different from, like,
all that stuff.
up.
Wasn't that sort of built to
Sure,
to
but
exploit
that's different.
these attention and network effects?
Yes, but that's definitely more product and less like content policy. So
that's what I mean.
Okay, well, yes,
it's
that
an
part is definitely true.
infrastructure design. But
Yes.
I think that's a niggle, because I think the big point you're making has almost got to be true. So look, American news media in the 19th century was a notorious swamp of extreme partisanship and fake news. And that lasted a century, and then it changed. So it didn't change magically. Some actual human beings said, enough is enough. This is bad for our country, it's bad for our customers, and it's bad for our business. So they began organizing the American Society of Newspaper Editors, which began building ethics codes and promulgating them, and stuff like you need to be reality-based and run corrections. You had the development of journalism schools, which began training people to be a strange new thing, professional journalist, a category that kind of didn't really exist as we know it back then. Those in turn promulgated values through newsrooms. You had prizes, the Pulitzer, the National Magazine Award, many others which incentivized better journalism. And it really only took a period of a few decades before you had the transformation from the yellow press of the 1890s to, Murrow by the 40s.
Yeah.
And it takes time, but that's the idea. That's the idea.
We are going to leave it there. Jonathan's new band, Epistemic Sewer, will be at the 9:30 Club this weekend.
No, my new band is called Madisonian Epistemology.
Yeah.
See, this is why.
Which will
this
be
is what
opening
people
for
said.
them.
And everyone buy the book. Here.
Yes.
Yes, we
The
put it.
book.
We put the link like multiple times in the chat. I missed the
The book.
9:30 Club.
The
But this-
Constitution of Knowledge, A Defense of Truth. It
It's
is
so great.
published by the Brookings Institution. It was workshopped on In Lieu of Fun. It is the first book in the history of knowledge to have been workshopped on In Lieu of Fun. We will be back. Jonathan Rauch, you're a great American. We will be back 22 hours and 41 minutes from now. With whom, Kate?
We don't. Oh, with Mark Polymeropoulos.
Oh, we will be back tomorrow with Mark Polymeropoulos, who also has a new book. And he's the former CIA officer, senior CIA officer, who was on the show talking about Havana Syndrome and his attack by almost certainly Russian directed energy weapons. That will be tomorrow at this time, 22 hours and 40 minutes from now. And until then, Jonathan?
You don't have fun anymore, but in lieu of fun, we buy this book.
We
Multiple
do buy
copies.
this book in lieu of fun. So many copies. We will see you tomorrow. Jonathan